Well, that's a nice round of applause. I think I'll go now. I'm going to be talking, as I said, about the project, and I will probably not be using the word dendrochronology. I much prefer the word tree ring analysis, much easier to remember and to pronounce. So, what are we going to talk about today? History of tree rings and how it relates specifically to Tewkesbury, which I hope's rather relevant here for the Historical Society. So thank you for inviting me to talk. This isn't all my own work, so there's a few acknowledgements at the front there that I have to say. I was the manager of the project, but it was organised by the Gloucester Building Recording Group, and we dated a total of 50 buildings, new buildings that is, by tree ring analysis in Newent, Gloucester and Tewkesbury. So it wasn't just Tewkesbury we were looking at, though it is a particularly interesting parish. The majority of the tree ring dating wasn't undertaken by myself. There was deemed to be a conflict of interest if I made money out of my own project. So we actually got in a Welsh dendrochronology group. Professor Nigel Nailing and Dr. Rob Bale of DendroArch did most of the tree ring dating that I'll be discussing. Now, if any of you picked up the leaflet as you came in, there's one for Newent, one for Gloucester and one for Tewkesbury. I'm not going to be covering anything on that because that's published. That was done about a year and a half ago at the end of the project. It summarised it. We're going to be talking about most of the stuff that's happened since. But if you do want to pick up any of these medieval walking maps, they are available at the back table. As I said, my last lecture was to the Friends of Tewkesbury Abbey, and that was probably beginning of 2001, but a lot has happened since then in terms of dating in Tewkesbury, so I'm going to be covering that. But you need to understand what tree ring analysis actually is. So I'm just going to cover a little brief section on that. How tree ring dating works. Then we're going to be looking at the tree ring dating of buildings, specifically just in Tewkesbury. Actually, none of these dates are officially published yet. It's vernacular architecture that they will be published in, and that should come out in March this year. So all the dates that are available to you here aren't published yet. So it's all brand new research. I'm going to break it up into three sections. So it's how tree ring dating works, the tree ring dating buildings of Tewkesbury, and then how we can use all this information just to look at the buildings in Tewkesbury and understand the dates just visually by looking at them. Hopefully about 15 minutes on each section, so it should keep you awake. Tree ring dating, how it works. It comes from the Greek, of the root words dendron, tree, chronos, time, and ology, the study of. It's a science that's been around since the 1920s. Radiocarbon dating has been around since the 1950s. Everyone's heard of radiocarbon dating. Not so many people are aware of tree ring analysis. There's a number of companies in the UK that do it, but as I say, not so many people are aware of it. So I'm just going to explain a little bit about how it works. It's based on weather, and a wide ring will tend to be produced by a tree in this country when it's warm and wet. A narrow ring will tend to be produced when it's cool and dry. And if we get a sequence of 50 rings, that pattern of good and bad years should be unique, a bit like a barcode, and should only fit one place in history. So if you imagine the 76 drought, the 80 drought, all of the oak trees, or I say all, many of the oak trees in this country would have put on narrow rings in those years because of the droughts. We don't just count the rings. If we just counted the rings, one ring equals 1 year, we would tell you how old the tree is. It's not really a lot of use for dating a building. Okay? What we actually do as dendrochronologists is measure the width of each ring. So here you can see the lighter band is your spring growth. This is when all your leaves start being put onto your oak trees in spring, and you get all this sap rising. You get this nice light colour, and then you get the darker growth in the summer. So one ring is a band of the light and the dark. And what we do is just measure the distance between each of those annual rings. And that's what you're looking at here, is just a graph. So the top, the peaks of the mountains are the wide rings, and the troughs, as you see here, are the narrow rings. And that's what gives us this unique barcode, wide and narrow rings. Unique pattern is what we're looking at here, that we've actually produced from 39 dated buildings in Tewkesbury. So this chronology, as we call it, which is just a sequence of tree rings over time, you can see the dates on the top there. So we're going back from 1218, and our chronology just developed from local buildings and local trees, at the moment goes up to 1737. This is specific to Tewkesbury. Obviously we have longer chronologies for other parts of the country, and in Ireland, with using bog pine, you can take the chronologies right back to about 5500 BC. And we know the annual, with annual precision, all the way back through time with that. But we're just specifically here looking at Tewkesbury, and hopefully you can see this reference chronology, or wiggle match, is produced by the building here, which is 125 the High Street. And we've got a series created measuring the rings of 188 rings, and we date it, so this very last ring that you see here is dated to 1591. So pencil-like cores were taken from this building, about 8 of them. It's still standing. We don't use chainsaws. About the size of your finger is the sample that we take. And using them, we'll match them together, and we produce this reference chronology specific to this building. And then if you look at the reference chronology we developed from earlier buildings, this was during the project, this building has been dated since the project, hopefully you can spot some of these troughs that line up and some of the peaks that line up. And if you're looking at that visually, you can see it. There's a lot of statistics I could throw at you for it, but visually, good years, wide rings, you're looking at the peaks. Bad years, narrow rings, the troughs. And if we've got a sequence, as I say, 50 rings, we should get annual precision. If it's less than 50 rings, it could fit anywhere. Yeah? And a tree, an oak tree, can get this big in only 30 or 40 years. So that's big enough for construction. If we're looking at the timbers in the roof here, they're about that size. It could be, they could only contain 40 rings, and we wouldn't be able to date them. Oak we can date confidently. Elm is also used in buildings. If your roof timbers are elm, can't date it, or very rarely. There's always exceptions to the rule. But it's very much more difficult to date elm. And there are other species as well used. Chestnut, for instance, popular. Now, as I was saying, for the reference chronology, these peaks and troughs are specific to Tewkesbury. Of our development of a chronology here. Here's the chronology again from specifically trees that were growing in Tewkesbury. And here, what I've done is listed the trees where 90% of them, 90% signatures, I'm not going to get into the statistics, basically where there's more than 20 rings and a lot of them are doing the same thing in a specific year, I put it up there. So in this case, in 1314, we've got a wide ring, yeah? A good year which corresponds to either wet or warm. And that was 20 out of the 22 trees show that. Trees are like people, yeah? They do their own thing to a certain degree. But what we're looking at is for the majority of the trees to get a pattern. And here we've got in 1914, a wide ring, as I said, 20 out of the 22 trees. And if you look online at Google or WeatherWeb, which is a good historical site of weather, historical weather events, mainly for the whole of England and Europe, so not specific to Tewkesbury, and you've got to bear that in mind. So the tree ring analysis that we've done for Tewkesbury specifically is saying 1314 was a good year. In Europe, it rained all summer and all autumn, so it was wet. Crops rotted in the ground because it was so wet. The trees like that, yeah. I'd be really fascinated to know if there is any historical documentation for Tewkesbury for that year, 1314, to say and confirm it was a good or a bad year. And the same with these other dates we've got here. So I've got a list of about 14 dates there. 1360, a narrowing, a bad year. That's 47 of the 52 trees that we've got for that period. And if you look generally across Britain, there's a huge drop in summer temperature, bad year, freezing rains. And it looks as if that affected Tewkesbury. But again, it'd be fascinating to know if there's any documentary evidence for that specific year. And you're the people to ask, I thought. So this is why I'm highlighting it here. This information isn't available, isn't published anywhere else. It's specific for your history group here, these rings and these years. Yep. So 1369, we've got across Europe a wet year, and it's a wide ring. So it seems to fit with the general pattern, but these other years, 1420, we've got nothing across Europe. It's not a year of note, but in Tewkesbury, it's saying it was a bad year. So again, is there historical documentation to say, you know, there was a flood or it was particularly dry, a drought year in that specific year? Love to know. And we go down this list. So 1423, a good year. 1451, a good year. 1464, a bad year. You get the idea. At the end of the lecture, what I'll probably do is make the slideshow available. So if anyone does want a copy of these specific years to have a look at the dates and maybe historical information for it, I'd love to give it to you, and I'd be really interested to find out the results. So we can date with a sequence of 50 rings. We can match that in a specific place in time. How do we know when a building was built, though, from that? Well, we're very confident that carpenters in the medieval period, right up until power saws today, used green oak, i.e. as soon as it came down, when it's soft, you shape it, you use your tools on it. It's so much easier to work. If you leave it for 1 year to season, it's much harder. You know, you've got to pay your workmen twice as much because it's twice as hard to work. So common sense dictates that they would use it green. If you walk into a pub and you see timbers up in the roof there, you will often see shrinkage cracks in them. People get worried about these, but they don't affect the structural integrity of the timbers at all. They are natural shrinkage cracks because the timbers weren't seasoned. Yeah? It's a natural part of the drying out process once they build. And it's actually a very clever way of building, because when you've got your mortise joints in timber framing, as it all seasons, it will slightly shrink and it pulls the joints together. So again, it's a clever way of building. They knew exactly what they were doing. So as soon as a tree is felled, we're saying, or at least within a year, normally those timbers will be used and shaped. So here's our pencil cores that we've taken out. As I said, they're not actually that big, about the size of my finger. If we can only see, you see the lighter band here, on the outside of a tree, this is your living part of it. Think of it like your skin over your bones. That's the living part of the tree, and the darker is your heartwood, which is more structurally related, you know, holding the tree up. So when we've got the sapwood all showing here, and statistically for this area, there should be between 9 and 41 rings of sapwood, that lighter wood on the outside. If we've got that and we haven't got where bark was surviving, just the sapwood, we know we can give you a range. So when you see tree ring dating and there isn't a precise absolute date, it's a range. It's because the bark didn't survive, we couldn't find it. But if you can see my white little Tipp-Ex marks there, that's where bark was. So if we've got that outermost ring and you can just see a little white lighter band there, you know the tree would have been felled in spring. If there's a little bit of the darker colour, you know it would have been the summer. and that's how we get the precision. Yeah? So we will be able to tell you the season that these timbers were felled, and we don't just date one timber in a building, we normally aim for about 8 to 10. Hopefully they're all going to be felled at the same time. That gives us a nice average pattern, and that will enable dating, and we can interpret the building from that. So we're going to look at some of the buildings we've actually dated in Tewkesbury now. So hopefully you understand tree ring analysis and how we get these dates. When we started the project, 2014, well, we didn't start the project, we conceptualized the project. We looked across the country and we saw Gloucester didn't have a lot of tree ring dates. Yeah, there wasn't a lot of tree ring dating in Gloucester back in 2014. The green counties here have over 100 dates. So at that time, Tewkesbury only had 53 dated. I say phases because it's not always a whole building. It may be just the roof, or the front of a building may have changed. You can't quite equate buildings to dates, to phases all the time, but normally it's going to be a big phase. So that's why I'm using phases rather than buildings. You can see Hampshire, some projects have been done in the past. Shropshire project was done, and they've got up to 207 buildings dated there, sorry, phases. Oxfordshire, quite a lot of Hampshire, not a lot in Gloucester. So the idea was to remedy this with the project, which we did. At the end of 2022, when we finished the project, we had 153 buildings dated for the county. So we were catching up to the likes of Hereford. We've overtaken Somerset. Other counties are still dating as well, so they're progressing as much. Today, when I looked at the database, we are now up to 190. Yeah, so we've got well past the 100 buildings dated, or phases, and we're almost up to the 200. And with that body of data, we're much more confident now on understanding the building traditions in Gloucester, which was the aim of the project. So I said at the end of 21, we dated all our buildings in Tewkesbury, and we produced this map, this medieval walking map. There are other buildings on there, not just medieval. We did this for Tewkesbury, we did this for Gloucester, and we did this for Newent. And those maps are all available at the back there. You can walk around the self-guided tour, look at the buildings, it will tell you the date, and on the back of the leaflet, it will give you a bit of information. We did that. We're going to update it now for you, though. So I'm going to tell you some of the other buildings that have been dated since then. Yeah? All of that was the end of the project. That's the summary of it. You can walk around Tewkesbury with those maps and update yourselves to your heart's content. But I'm not going to be covering that. We'll look at what else we've gone on to. So we're now up to, just in Tewkesbury, 45 tree ring dated, and here we say phases again, or parts of buildings. Yeah? There's a histogram of them all, and hopefully you can all see a peak from around 1410 to what, 1490? This little peak of building. The majority of the buildings that we found, and it was a bit of a problem actually, because we wanted a range of buildings so we could see how styles change over time. We came to Tewkesbury, they're all early. So we've got a big building phase in Tewkesbury between 1410 and 1480. Now, when you've got a lot of building, it means you have money coming into Tewkesbury. And the likely explanation for it is going to be the wool trade, or the derivative industries of wool, weaving and the like at that early period. So there's a massive building phase. And then later, during the Tudor period and the dissolution, we have much less building in Tewkesbury. But then you have a renaissance, again, around the Elizabethan period. So just down here, I'm saying early medieval is pre-1400. You have got a few buildings very early surviving, which is quite rare across the country. Anything between, earlier than 1400 is pretty good and unlikely to survive.
We have a peak of building around the medieval, between 1400, well, we're not, it's 1410 to 1480s there. And then we have another phase, about 4 decades during the Elizabethan period there, which is 1460 to 1599. So just from the tree ring analysis of the 45 buildings, we can see peaks of building. We can understand this is how Tewkesbury developed. If we only had 2 or 3 buildings dated in Tewkesbury, we wouldn't be aware of this at all. It's the pure number now that we're starting to develop in Tewkesbury that allows us to identify this. This is just them all plotted, same dates. Early medieval is in black here, so we've got a dot there. So where are we? We are just here, aren't we? Round about here. So we've got early medieval just around Church Street. That's the only place we've identified it. So there's the Abbey here. Nothing is showing as early medieval from the Abbey because we just couldn't find the surviving timbers. Obviously we know it's early medieval, yeah, but there were no timbers surviving for us to date. This is only showing the tree ring dates we've got. And then we can see during the medieval, 1400 to 1490, it spreads out all along the High Street, and you have this peak of building, yeah, in Tewkesbury. Thereafter, we have the Elizabethan period, which is the purple here, violet shown, spreading out, but the town doesn't expand further. We sort of know it's restricted, don't we, physically as well, but it didn't expand further. But you can see how it did expand between the early medieval time and the Tudor period. Sorry, not the Tudor, the later medieval period. So if you're looking for the earliest buildings, look in Church Street. Yeah, if you want medieval buildings, you want to be looking up the High Street. That's what the data that we've got so far is telling us. The earliest buildings, everyone always wants to know the earliest buildings. So I've put it on here. It's just next door to us, just past the Berkeley Arms. You have 9 Church Street, so that's the Berkeley Arms, and next to it is 9 Church Street. The front is dated to 1332. Again, a very early building. But what you're looking at here is a later gable. Okay, so don't let that fool you. There is an older building behind that. Facades change, fashions change. People like to keep up with the Joneses, so you will get alteration of your front. During the Edwardian period, Edwardian period, you will have, stone fronts going on, and bricks come into fashion, and timber goes out of fashion, so you'd have all your fronts of your buildings bricked. So you've got to be careful when you're looking at the outside of the building. That date does not correspond with that gable we're looking at, but behind there are original timbers. And then our second earliest building is 82 to 83 Church Street. The front range that we're looking at here is 1452, but hidden behind it is an earlier range of 1340. So again, this is probably a case of keeping up with the Joneses. Yeah, originally there would have been an earlier building on that site, and they probably demolished the front and rebuilt. It's that peak of build again, 1452. So we're expecting, a lot of economic value coming into Tewkesbury at that point. You want to show off your wealth. If you're a person of status, you do that through timber framing. A bit like parking your Porsche out or Tesla out the front of your drive today. In those days, you did it with timber. The more timber, the wealth. These are some of the newly dated buildings that we've been dating, mainly in the High Street. So we've got 22 the High Street there. Front range dated 1478. So again, it's that peak of build of the medieval. It fits in with it. And 28 the High Street, front range dated 1482. So again, another building fitting into that pattern that we saw, yeah, of peak of build between 1410s and 1480s. And then we dated some others in the High Street which are new. 12 the High Street, dated 1569. 135 the High Street, dated 1591. Both of these fall into our Elizabethan peak, saying that there was a time, that they were building again post-Tudor. So it seems to have two main phases of development in Tewkesbury historically, in terms of buildings. I told you the earliest building, so the latest building we've got. Hopefully you all recognise that as the building just almost opposite the church front here. 100 Church Street, the Heritage Centre, is dated internally 1465 to 95. We couldn't find bark, so it's a range. Okay, we haven't got the precision for that. But the front, the facade, we tree ring dated to 1664. And just as added reinforcement, it's always nice when all the facts and the evidence points in the same direction. We have inscribed just above the door there, if you care to look at it, 1664, which matches precisely with the tree ring analysis dates. So hopefully that's convincing for you if you didn't believe what I was saying before. That was one of the latest. Let me go back. No, it won't. That was one of the latest buildings, but we have got later uses of oak in Tewkesbury. So here we've got the Abbey roof, which we think was originally built in not originally, but we've got evidence for a roof of 1522, and it's been rebuilt in 1723. So this is one of the last uses of oak we found in Tewkesbury, followed by the roof alteration to this building for Tolsey Lane. The original building we're looking at here is dated to 1463, but there's alterations in the roof using oak which are dated to 62 there. And after that period, oak fades out. Yeah, you don't get the oak timber frame tradition much beyond those dates. You tend to get imported timber, you get mechanisation, and you get brick buildings being used a lot more. So after that date, the timber frame tradition tends to fade. I said the roof was altered in Tewkesbury Abbey, not so in the north transept. So this is a lovely drawing by Hewitt in 1985, showing the structure that was in, or still exists, sorry, in the north transept roof. And we've dated some of the reused timbers in the nave roof to 1521. So the implication is this is what the nave roof looked like, and they had to reinforce it, they had to change it, there was alterations, and it's been changed since. Same with Tolsey Lane, that's the front range dated. There's been alterations, that's as it stands today, but if you look at some of the timbers and the mortises and in there and the peg holes, you can do a rough reconstruction of what it would look like. So where the front door is now, it wouldn't have been. As in the case of many of the Tewkesbury buildings, you go down the side passage and you enter your building from the side passage. So that's how we think it would have looked originally, much altered now. And this is another example of facades. Don't judge a book by its cover almost. Go and have a look inside. Pubs of Tewkesbury, you've got a fair few, and we dated a number of them. It was partly deliberately because we understand you can walk into a pub, you can see the timbers. It's not so easy to walk into private, houses. So we deliberately targeted some of the pubs in Tewkesbury. We got the Black Bear, we've dated, which is just behind here, a kitchen range to 1437, the main range, which is there, to 1439, and the cross wing, which is this, to 1439. So a big complex building has gone up within 1-2 years. And then the Berkeley Arms, just next to us here, while the front has been changed later, 1495, the rear range, 1439. So the implication there is the Berkeley Arms was basically built at the same time as the Black Bear. So they're cousins, yeah, within a year. They were both going up. You've got an outbuilding as well at the back of the Berkeley Arms. I don't know if you've walked in there. There were rumours that it could be, you know, incredibly early Norman, possibly. We took the dates, we took the course from it, and we've got it to 1462. But it's showing that there was wealth coming in. There's a big building activity around this period. And if you've got wealth and you've got people visiting, you need people to, you know, places to stay. So it explains possibly why all these inns were going up. Next to the Black Bear, there's very little of it standing now due to a fire. You can just see this brick wall and what looks to be the original door standing. But we did an artist impression of what it looked like before the fire. So this is 67 the High Street, and we've tree ring dated this to 1585. So again, Elizabethan. Yeah. In Tewkesbury, you seem to have a choice of between 1410 and 1480 or Elizabethan for your timber frame buildings. So we've got a big database now of buildings dated 45 in Tewkesbury. So we should be able to spot some patterns, yeah? Some carpenter traditions, if you like, for dating that you can visually see in dating buildings. And this is what I'm just going to go through for the last part of the lecture. So there is a well-known traditional phasing between open halls, which is where you just have the fire at the bottom, so you don't have a first floor, very much like this hall actually. Think of the big Saxon halls, very similar to this. Fire would be here, smoke rises up to the rafters and goes out the roof. It deposits smoke on your rafters. Yeah? So you can imagine a fire here, all this would be smoke blackened up here. So if you see smoke blackening in your rafters, if you stick your head up your roof, you know, through the attic and you see smoke blackening, you're likely to be, they use open halls up until around 1550. That's what we understood from the rest of the country. And then they have a transitional phase, narrowing it down, maybe just 1 or 2 bays with an open hall and the smoke rising up, which is showing here, which is used between 1550 and 1600. And then chimneys start to be used, which is what we use today, and you don't get smoke blackening on your rafters. Everyone relatively clear on that? So open hall, you will have the evidence up there. That's what we understood for the rest of the country. These are the dates we've got for Gloucester as a whole now, so I'm not just talking about Tewkesbury. And you can see that black histogram goes up to where are we there? 1530 is the latest open hall that we have in Gloucester as a county. Not far off what we're seeing as a pattern of the rest of the country. Smoke aprons, smoke bays. So this period of transition across the rest of the country between open halls and chimneys, in the rest of the country 1550 to 1600, seems to be a bit earlier. So is Gloucester a bit ahead of the game in some cases? And please remember that this is your domestic dwellings, yeah? I'm not talking about the crown, castles, I'm not talking about palaces, and I'm not talking about the clergy, who will have had earlier chimneys. Yeah, I'm talking about your domestic level buildings here. And then after, what's the date here? So after 1530, we're looking mainly at chimneys and no open halls. So it seems to stand for, you know, Gloucester. If you look up, you see smoke blackening, you know you are before 1550. If you haven't got smoke blackening, you're after 1550. Now, not everyone can look in your loft, so we're going to go on to some items that you can see from the outside to help date some buildings. These are types of roof truss. Now, I'm going to quickly go over them because terminology is a nightmare in building archaeology, and you will glaze over and your heads will slowly nod off like this. So I'm going to skip pretty much through crown post, queen strut and raking queen strut, but you'll see there is this transition. The fashion changes through time. So if you understand what a crown post looks like, it should be early. So if you look up in your roof and you see something like that, it should be earlier. If you're looking at either of these two, it's going to be later. And here's the actual dating evidence we've got for Gloucester. The black again is the crown post, and you'll see an early example 1330 and 1380 there are our two examples, and then crown struts which are very similar. So they are early roofs. It fits with our understanding of the rest of the county. We can confidently now date crown posts and crown struts where we see them in Gloucester. What else can we look at? It doesn't really show in these photos, I apologise, but these wind braces are curved, these ones are straight. And there is a big change in fashion from curved to straight, not only in the roof, but externally as well. So if you're looking at a building and you see curved, think early. If you see straight bracing, think late. And the divide we've got for most of the rest of the country from our dating evidence is around 1580. Curved wind braces in the roof go to straight at that date. And it's quite a sharp change across the rest of the country. So does that hold true for Gloucester? Well, here's our curved wind braces. Early, and then our first straight one, 1510. Curved, and thereafter, 1580, all wind braces are straight. So it does seem to hold true. There's a change across the rest of the country and Gloucester around this 1570 period in the wind braces in the roof where you can't normally see. So let's look at what you can see, wall frame features on the outside of the buildings. Tends to be large panels to start with, and then they want to show off more, so more timber, make the panels smaller. And then you have this Elizabethan flowering of just decorative panel, which across the rest of the country mainly lasts for quite a narrow period, maybe only 30 or 40 years. And that's the Elizabethan flowering of timber framing. It's where timber framing really reaches its peak, and it's all downhill after that. So that's from the rest of the country. Remember this decorative framing here, yeah? This one is what I'm particularly interested in. Tends to be between 1580 and 1620. It holds true with what we dated in the Dendro project. There's only two examples of decorative framing there, which are between 1580 and 1590. We then dated two buildings in the High Street which seem to have this decorative framing. And there we go. 12 the High Street, quite decorative there. Nice decorative S bracing there. And these are dated exactly to that peak of the Elizabethan flowering. Yeah. So it seems to hold true for Gloucester. So we understand. That's a summary of the stylistic dating features that we had from other countries when we started the project. That just summarises, you know, the roof, the open halls, how long they last for before they change. That summarises all the dating features we now understand for Gloucester. And this is what we're publishing this year, hopefully March, April it should be, so that we are much more accurate now on understanding where it does fit the rest of the country and where there are exceptions for Gloucester. So just a few Tewkesbury specific examples. We're saying about curved bracing. Curved is early. Here we have a very well-known building and prominent building, 39 to 45 John Moore Museum, which we've confidently dated to 1408. You can see the curved bracing there. The Old Baptist Chapel, you can see the curved bracing on the outside. As soon as you see curved bracing, you know it's pre-what, 1510, 1520. Berkeley Arms, just out there, you have curved bracing. here, and we have a date that fits in. It can't really be later than 1500, yeah, if it's curved bracing. So it's a useful feature. If you see curved, early. If you see straight, late. Another feature that we have a huge number of in Tewkesbury is studding, close studding. This is just, again, showing off lots of wealth with timber. You don't need this structurally. Yeah? This is pure wealth and ostentatious. So we can have close studding with a rail or close studding, lots of timber framing, and we find that this is used for a very short period, well, not a short, hugely short period, but about, what, 60, 70 years there? So from about 1430 up until about, what, 1520 there. So when you see that, as you see it at the Crook House, 82 the High Street, 1452, it fits the pattern of our red bar there. Same with 63 Church Street, very brightly coloured building, but you can see curved bracing and you can see close studding. It tells you it's early. Any buildings that you see with these features should be earlier unless they've altered the front, which they do sometimes try and do. And the Berkeley Arms, again, we've got close studding, curved bracing on the outside, and it fits the pattern that we've established, 1495. So this is coming up to the end of the lecture, and the most recent building that I've been called in to date in Tewkesbury, this was literally last month, I think, we were called into this one. It's not a domestic dwelling, it's actually an industrial building, so there's no heating in it, so people didn't live there. And we've dated this, the front range here, there's none of this close studding you'll see on the outside there. There's no curved braces, so it's not saying it's an early building. But it has been altered on time and over time, and it was quite confusing to understand the building just looking at it, which is why we needed the tree ring dating. And the front range that you're looking at here is dated 1612, but there's an awful lot of timbers inside that have been altered and changed, and we're getting later major reconstruction in 1719. So it's likely to be related to the grain trade, this, and the malt industry, which was a significant part of Tewkesbury's history, which hopefully, if you do the documentary evidence, those dates will fit in with it. So I'm expecting, you know, the grain trade to be blossoming around 1612, if this building was originally used for it. Buildings do get altered over time. So that's where we stand now. You've got the latest buildings that we've dated. That's the latest information. We are still recording buildings, and if you want to get the Gloucester Building Recording Group into your building, we will happily produce you a little report and try and stylistic date it, which is visually date it, and write up a report for you. If you want to undertake archival research, we've been a couple of times, we're trying to encourage our members. The Heritage Hub in Gloucester is a fantastic new resource, and they're actually doing supported sessions every Tuesday. So if you want to do archive research, it's a really good place to do that. And of course, you've always got Google as well now. So if you want to do desktop research on some of the dates that we've been putting there, or some of the dates for buildings, remember these haven't been researched before, and we haven't done the archival evidence for these buildings. So we don't know who lived there, we don't know why they were built. All we're doing is producing dates at the moment. We need historical documentation to link it so we understand what was going on, why it was going on. But that's out of our remit, and we're passing the buck on that one, and we're passing it out to you through this lecture. If you want to get your tree ring, your building tree ring dated through dendrochronological analysis, try saying that fast, it'll cost you in the region of £600 or more. I live in the Forest of Dean, I am a dendrochronologist, and I'm particularly interested in Tewkesbury, so I'm offering it at a cheap rate at the moment in Tewkesbury. Reconstructional drawings, we've got some excellent guys who will do reconstructions of your building. So if you have had if you know it's a timber frame building, but you can't see it because it's behind a later, facade change, you can get reconstructional drawings from it, and they will cost you, if you go through the Gloucester Building Recording Group, around £150. Thank you for listening. I believe it's traditional.